Welcome to VLGA Connect. I'm Catherine Arndt and you're listening to the national broadcaster on all things local government.
And a big hello and welcome during Victorian Council election week to the TGU panel from VLGA Connect. And yes, we're going to be talking all things elections as we're starting to work out who the winners are, who the losers are, some surprise results, some interesting stats to tell you about. Municipal monitors have been announced this week for 3 councils as they commence their new terms. The latest council CEO to announce a new career move, and Rhys Thomas will be here to talk about that gap between council election day and the swearing in of councillors and the limits on the powers of councils and CEOs during that period. So as always, lots to get through, and to help us with it, we've got Tony Rownick from our sponsors Hunt and Hunt Lawyers joining us. Hello, Tony.
Hey, Chris. Morning, Julie. Been a busy week, putting finishing touches on lots of induction presentations that are coming up from next week, and touching base with a lot of CEOs about that content. So busy couple of weeks ahead for me and a lot of councils. Yeah.
And as Tony revealed, no surprise, Julie Reid's here too from LGX. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Chris. Yes, and I'm busy putting together final touches for inductions as well. Really looking forward to getting out and about and helping councillors transition in. But most importantly, Chris, what you've forgotten to say at the very start of today is today, the 8th of November, is World Town Planning Day, Chris.
Oh, can you ever forgive me?
Opportunity for planners and communities to celebrate how good planning improves the lives of people and benefits society at large, can I say. So happy World Town Planning Day to all of the planners out there.
Julie, who decides such a thing that today is World Town Planning Day?
It's actually part of something that the Global Planners Network comes up with. So and the Planning Institute of Australia is part of the Global Planners Network, and I think it's actually the 75th World Town Planning Day. So it's been going for a long time, and I think it was set globally 75 years ago. There you go.
Well, there you go. I must admit, most of those 75 times it's passed me by.
I have mentioned it before, but I just thought I'd remind you that today is a special day.
Thank you, Julie. And it's a special day for a lot of council candidates. As many more will find out today, as some have over the past couple of days, whether their bid for election to their local council has been successful or not. And we've had some really interesting results. So just to set the scene where we're at, the VEC started releasing provisional results on Wednesday. There was a batch of more than 50 came out yesterday, Thursday, as we record this. There's about 18, I think, or so more to come, and a few of those need to be completed, with a few wards still to be determined through distribution of preferences. We've got 4 councils that have had their entire complement now officially declared. So they'll be moving into the induction period and getting ready for oath or affirmation of office, etc. They're all pretty much rural. Corangamite, West Wimmera, Tawong, and there's one more at Yarriambiack. Did I mention that? And yes, they're the 4 that are so far declared. So we've got a list here of things to note. Anything in particular, Tony, firstly, that's jumped out at you from what we've discovered in the past few days?
Well, I'd say certainly City of Melbourne, the biggest council, in the end, a comfortable win by Nick Rhys, the incumbent, and his deputy, of course, another incumbent councillor, Rashina Campbell, 61.5% of the vote in the end, and really a case of that team Rhys way out in front, and then a cluster of candidates in 2nd, 3rd and 4th place. So congratulations to the Lord Mayor, Nick Rhys. When we've got a mix of returning councillors in the City of Melbourne, 4 returning councillors and 5 new councillors.
And interesting that in the wash-up, it was a pretty strong win for Nick Rhys, Tony and Julie. You remember back when the polls first closed, people were talking about preferences, perhaps going in a different direction to what they ultimately did, which I think tells us what we discussed last week. People perhaps aren't following how to vote preference cards, out of vote cards from candidates very closely.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's certainly the case, and one wouldn't in the future rely on those preferences
No.
to flow through. But yeah, a comfortable win must be said now by Nick Rhys. I think ultimately 20,000 primary votes, and then the nearest other candidate was Roxanne Ingleton came in at about 12,000 votes, and very close between her, Mariam Ritzer from the Liberals, and Team Cooter or Anthony
Yeah.
Koutafidis fourth. So real cluster at that second, third, and fourth. But Nick Rhys, way out in front.
Now, we're
Mm.
not going to go through all of the councils. There is a podcast for that if you want to be bored to tears. My edition this morning of the Roundup spends about 20 minutes going through every result so far provided, and surprisingly already scoring record download numbers. Go figure. But here's a few highlights. Len Cox is now Victoria's longest serving councillor, first elected in 1982. He's been re-elected at Yarra Ranges. That's an amazing effort.
Isn't it? For that period of time, just is embedded in the community, and the community like Len, and they're bringing him back.
Yeah. We've got two former MPs that are starting local government careers, Ali Cupper in Mildura and Tanya Maxwell in Wangaratta. And we've got a former Upper House MP who was, before that, a former long-term councillor and mayor at Maribyrnong City Council, Catherine Cumming, who has failed in her bid to be re-elected to Maribyrnong City Council. So I think just the two former MPs look like taking a place around the council table somewhere. Former Mitchell Shire councillor and Mayor Fiona Stevens is one of two that were trying to move to another council, and she's been successful in moving across to Strathbogie. Richard Stockman, former Nillumbik councillor, has not been successful in moving across to Whittlesea. And I just wanted to note some strong performances by some sitting mayors around the state. Very high first preference votes for Shane Sarley at Greater Shepparton. Sophie Price at Indigo topped the poll there in the unsubdivided municipality. Cook Lamb is back at Maribyrnong. Elizabeth Long is back at Central Goldfields. Brett Cunningham is back at Golden Plains. Brian Hood is back at Hepburn. And there are some more, but there's some that stood out. So it's a real mix here of incumbents and new faces, isn't it, team?
Yeah, because there's been, quite a few mayors that have, or previous mayors that have got back in, but there's also those that haven't got back in, haven't there, Chris? So,
Yeah.
so it's interesting that some of them are obviously performing really strongly in the community, and others, the community is saying, enough, we need some change. So, interesting, and I don't know whether that is actually reflective of the community or whether the community is just random, because the community don't really know who they're voting for. It's really, really hard to understand that.
Yeah. Some surprise results where some sitting mayors have not been re-elected. A couple of these caught me by surprise. Jenna Davy Burns at Kingston, Joe Gianfrido at Stonington, Rob Haswell at Northern Grampians, Anne-Marie McCabe at Bor, Fiona Stitfold at Bayside, and Sophie Todorov at Yarra Ranges. They have all been defeated. And a real surprise, the MAV president of quite some time, David Clark, a long-term councillor at Pyrenees, has been defeated as well. So the MAV will need a new president.
Yeah, that'll be a huge blow. No, I'm not sort of questioning the wisdom of the electors in Pyrenees, but David Clark's been a really vocal, articulate advocate for the sector in that role as president of the MAV. He's really the only MAV identity with any real prominence in public circles in the last few years, I would say. And so, yeah, that leaves a big chasm that will need to be filled. And just in terms of the mayoralty and being elected, re-elected, I think in some councils it can be a poison chalice to be going into the election as the mayor. The mayor sometimes is the person that if a council's seen as having lost its way or not performing well, that's often the candidate that the electors want to make sure doesn't get re-elected. So yeah, as Julie said, quite a mix, and one would need to sort of really understand the real particular local issues in each of those municipalities to understand what precisely went on there for those mayors to lose.
And it's interesting that you say, Tony, that people will target those mayors because of maybe not being happy with the particular council performance or whatever. But it's interesting when the councillors are looking to become mayor, they see it in the opposite way often, the final year being, I get a lot of profile, I get seen in the community, and so there's a very good chance of me being re-elected. So it's interesting that sometimes it does work against them, because I've always thought the opposite. I've always thought that it would promote them a lot more, depending on their, the way that they've conducted themselves.
Yeah.
But it could be, like you say, a message to the council, not to the individual.
Yeah. Well, often we've seen that last year of a council term, the prize really for profile is that incumbency, isn't it, of the mayor. Latrobe Mayor,
That's right.
former Latrobe Mayor Kelly O'Callaghan, another one who has not been re-elected. I want to throw a question out to you, and perhaps it's something we can discuss in another week or so. But this has been an issue in New South Wales after their elections recently, where those councils that have mayors elected from within the council complement have made some decisions that haven't followed the way the communities voted in terms of first preferences. So what I'm saying is, for example, at Greater Shepparton, Shane Sarley, 75% of the first preference votes. The argument that some people are running in New South Wales is, even though the people haven't elected him as mayor, the councillors should have regard to that in determining who the mayor should be. Of course, it doesn't work that way. And I think we need to have a bit of a conversation about that perhaps in the next week or so, do you think?
I think so, because I think that we need to think about what is the role of the mayor now, because that's shifting and changing. And we've seen changes, obviously, in the legislation regulations where the mayor has more responsibility. So, and I think that there's no doubt that in that role, you need someone who's a strong leader. And so is it right to just take, the community's position on that? Or should you be in the group looking at who is the person who's showing leadership qualities that can take us through the next 12 months? I don't know what you think, Tony.
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of considerations, and as you say, Chris, is an additional one potentially the extent to which that councillor has a very large support group in the community, or large community support, and was elected on a substantial mandate as opposed to perhaps in a tight fight. I think ultimately the most important element will be having someone who is inwardly a good leader of that group of individuals. To me, I think that's probably the key element. There are others which are, that ability to be, I guess, a bit sort of presidential in the way that they can speak to the community, articulate, be the voice of council as well.
Like a Donald Trump, you think, Tony?
Well, I did say president.
I don't know about that.
But let's just stick to Australia on this one. But look. So to me, the fact that somebody might have sort of got the biggest margin in terms of being elected wouldn't be definitive for me that they ought to be the mayor. I think there are many other considerations here.
Yes, and my simple answer would be if you want directly elected mayors, have directly elected mayors.
That's
like
right.
we do in Melbourne. I want to thank Rhys Thomas for some of the insights that are being fed to us. He's picked up another former MP who's failed to get a seat on council, this time in Wodonga, where Tim Quilty was running for councillor. A couple of close calls. Graham Middlemiss at Latrobe has defeated Steph Morgan by just 3 votes.
Wow.
So when you think about where Graham and Steph's votes went, it's probably even a little narrow in terms of the rest of the community's thoughts there. Thinking of Rob Steen at Maroondah, who's close but not quite, with 49.93% of first preferences votes. So 0.7 of 1% short, and of course should be pretty safe, but still has to go to preference distribution there. And Rhys has given us a weird fact in Hepburnshire. I trust him to pick this up. In Hepburnshire, voters appear to have chosen their councillors alphabetically, with Clark, Cornish, Dryly, Henderson, Hewitt, Hockey and Hood elected, and Peterson, Horachovsky, Sedgman, Stone, and Winfield Gray missing out. That is,
However, I will argue that
yeah,
most of those with the titles that are earlier on in the alphabet are actually were existing councillors and they've got back in. So, but
yes,
they've gone
yes,
to an interesting. They've gone to a situation where there's no wards now in Hepburn.
yeah.
So there's probably through that there's going to be a bit of a shake-up, and I think we anticipated there would be a bit of a shake-up at Hepburn as a result of no more wards, unsubdivided.
Which just makes it even more extraordinary that it's ended up being an alphabetical result.
I
So,
know it
you know,
may be that people have done that, but yeah, I think
yeah,
there's
Can I
also.
say I'm a voter there, and I gave no thought whatsoever
to the
to
alphabet.
the alphabetical order.
Oh, but it is a
Yes.
weird fact.
All right. Now, as we record this on Friday morning, there are more computer counts scheduled for today and even for tomorrow. Greater Geelong, I know, is one that will be announced tomorrow. I think Whittlesea as well. 4 declarations made so far, as I mentioned earlier. And a quick snapshot, the VLGA will do some full analysis here of stats, but out of the first 200 councillors elected, if you're wondering, 51% are incumbents, 39% are women. Of the first 25 councils declared, 22 will include the sitting mayor, 13 will include the current deputy, 8 will have more women councillors than men so far. It's just early days, of course. 13 will have a majority of new councillors. So a lot of new faces. That's the feeling I've been getting. A lot of new faces around the sector, and lots more detailed analysis of trends and composition to come once the final results are declared.
Yeah.
Anything
We
more,
predicted
Tony or
that,
Julie?
didn't we? We
Say that
predicted
again.
that there was going to be quite a bit of change. And so this is showing that there is, definitely a lot of change there. It'll be interesting to watch the rest of it. I'm assuming that they continue to still count over the weekend, do they, Chris? Do they work on the weekends?
Well, they're doing some computer counts in Whittlesea and Geelong on Saturday. So,
Yeah, great.
so on that basis, you'd have to say yes. We're getting
Yes.
towards the
Okay.
finish line, and
Yeah.
all to be declared by the end of next week. So,
Yeah.
busy beavers at the moment.
Mm.
Anything more on elections before we leave that behind, Tony or
I
Julie?
would just say that a number of councils, Casey and Whittlesea, have returned councillors who were dismissed.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So the electors, in their wisdom, decided that despite the government's decision previously to dismiss certain of these councillors, that they would support their return. So Gary Rowe has been re-elected in the city of Casey, and a number of councillors in the city of Whittlesea who previously sat prior to the appointment of administrators.
Okay, we'll watch that. And that's a good segue then into the announcement this week from the local government minister, Melissa Horne, of municipal monitors for Casey, Whittlesea and Strathbogie. 3 councils that are coming out of administration with this round of elections. And they're all familiar names. Peter Stevenson and Cameron Boardman will be the monitors at Casey. Now, Peter's been the administrator at Strathbogie up until now. Cameron's been one of the panel of administrators at Casey. Peter Duncan, one of the panel of administrators at Whittlesea, who I've worked with for a time, is going to stay on as a municipal monitor there, along with the very experienced hands of Jude Munro. And Marg Allen, who you'll remember was the monitor at Moira Shire before the Commission of Inquiry took place. Marg is returning to a monitor role this time at Strathbogie. They all started this week on Wednesday, and they're in place for 12 months.
Yeah, it was interesting, the decision to go in for 12 months, because there has been a pattern previously of them going in for a shorter period of time, I've noticed, Chris, and then being extended. So it was good news, I think. Good news that they're in there for 12 months. I don't know whether there's a particular message in that. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting for a 12-month appointment.
Yeah, I think, Tony, I think a lot of the more recent ones have been pretty much nearly 12 months, haven't they?
Yeah.
That's the newer trend.
That's right. I mean, it's hard to read into this, but I'm assuming that it's like, let's see the new in the case of Casey and Whittlesea, and Strathbogie for that matter, let's see the new council that's been elected. We've had a period without councillors. Let's see how that group, how functional they are. They'll probably need some guidance initially, but the intention being to move to the more normal process after in November 2025.
And it's that first 12 months really that sets them up for success, isn't it? By the time they get
Mm.
inducted, we get into the new year. Council plan and budget process, of course, needs to take place, and then all of a sudden you're into the new financial year, and November's not that far away.
Yeah, and I suspect that those councils will have, good policies and procedures and everything in place during that time of the administrators. Things have been set up really well, and so there'll be no doubt a great support for the CEOs during the time of their 12-month appointment, making sure that the councillors understand their roles and are performing well. So yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Okay, we might pause to head across to Rhys Thomas for his segment this week to talk about that very interesting gap period between having an elected council and an incoming council. And we'll come back and talk about more of the week's news here on the panel in just a little bit. Wow, what a fun time it is unpacking all these election results. And Rhys Thomas is going to give us a little bit of a breather now as we step into his weekly segment, which is called Reserve Powers, Rhys. And still the puns go on.
Oh, it's an election week for all of us, isn't it? No matter where in the world you are.
And thank you for some of those additional insights that we've used in our panel discussion this morning, which have come from you. Greatly appreciated. I'm sure you'll continue perusing the results to pick up a few more of those.
I can't help myself.
The other big election this week, I don't really want to talk too much about the result, if you don't mind, is the US election. You were keeping a close eye on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, like many people, I was watching the outcome, but it's relevant. I thought I might talk about it in the local government context because the US system has a different arrangement, which is obviously the result in the states is now known. But President Trump isn't the president today.
No.
In fact, he doesn't become the president until January because they have what they call a lame duck session.
Yeah.
Essentially, President Biden continues in office. So we don't do that in local government in Victoria. And in fact, we don't do that in government in Australia, except in the federal Senate we do.
But just before we get off that, what is the bet, though, that President-elect Trump is making decisions and starting to take some actions that, technically he probably doesn't have the power to do yet?
Well, he can't exercise power, but look, I'm not all anti the idea that you should take a little bit of time to get ready. And I think with the councils here facing up to a crammed induction program ahead of Christmas, I suspect there'd be many councillors who've been elected here who probably wouldn't mind if someone said to them, just get your affairs in order and you can take over the role in January. But anyway, that's not the system we have.
Fair to say, though,
there's reasons for that.
Fair to say, though, and we sort of go through this every 4 years, there is a bit of frustration around about this period of time where we have this gap, don't we? We've got a period with no councillors and then a period where councillors need to be inducted. We probably won't have mayors for a few more weeks.
Yeah, and so the obvious question out of all of that is who's in charge? Today, what happens? Well, I've had a bit of a look, and I'm pretty confident that the answer is a pretty unsatisfactory one, which is no one's in charge.
Right.
Obviously,
officially, technically,
are still in office, and they hold their roles, and councils continue to operate, and the day-to-day operation goes ahead because that's largely the purview of the CEO. And because local government councillors' role is a strategic one, maybe you don't need them for a period. And I suppose that's how we've always rolled in the system. But it's a bit of a gamble in my view, because although councils, many of the powers that councils have are strategic things. So it's either things that don't have to happen at this time of year, like adopting a council plan or a budget or setting rates, or they're things that the council can control. So reviewing policies and the planning scheme, changing delegations, procurement activities, all those things councils will have planned for. But what if something unexpected happened? What if there was an emergency? Well, I suppose you'd look to the CEO, wouldn't you? So imagine a scenario where there was a fire in the council depot, which meant that the waste services couldn't be delivered. And as a result, there was a need to undertake some emergency works to make it safe. You might need to engage a contract for another provider to quickly step in and deliver services. You might need to go to the bank to borrow money to pay for all of that. Well, the CEO wouldn't necessarily have all of those powers. So they might have to make a whole lot of short-term arrangements that fall within their delegations. So maybe there's a workaround. What if there's an advocacy position that needs to be taken by the council? And the cynic in me says that other levels of government do look to this sort of vacuum. You look at our planning reforms that are being rolled out at the moment, and the frustration that the local government voice hasn't been part of that conversation.
And we have seen some council CEOs step up in that circumstance and make some pretty firm announcements that they wouldn't normally be spokesperson for.
Absolutely. And the councils, the CEOs that have been able to do that are those who understand the clear policy position of their council. There are other communities where the council itself hasn't resolved a position. So nobody's saying anything. Imagine if a strategic property purchase cropped up. Perhaps a council's been waiting to make a purchase to develop some open space for many years, and all of a sudden there's a piece of land on the market and the CEO doesn't have the delegation to buy it today. That might be an opportunity lost to the community. So there's a whole lot of sort of, in my view, somewhat unsatisfactory things that mean that an extended delay, and remember the delay is getting longer over time because of the changes to the postal service. The amount of time it takes to collect and count the votes is longer than it used to be. So this gap is widening. And
do we live with this as one of the costs of the democratic process, or is there a solution?
Well, I'm not convinced that there's an easy solution. It certainly would require legislation. You'd either have to extend the council term up to the point at which the declaration was made. So effectively, you'd have a councillors in office after the election day. So that's a lame duck session. Or you'd have to change the legislation to make the vote counting much more quick. And the obvious solution to that would be attendance voting. And I'm not quite sure that anybody really wants to go into that minefield and all the expense associated with that. But there's a big risk. And there's one that I can see that I think actually probably does need some attention. It's not likely, but it's possible. And the reason last week I put out a call to CEOs to please not die, and
they've
thank you, by the way.
Obliged.
I believe they all took my my advice, so that's nice of them. Is that there's a significant flaw in the Act that relates to the appointment of CEOs and councillors. And that is Section 44 requires that the CEO be appointed by the council. And Section 30 requires that councillors can only assume office after taking the oath or affirmation in front of the CEO. So it's a circular reference. Only the CEO can swear in a councillor, and only a council can appoint a CEO. So if a CEO were to die or otherwise be unable to act, there really is no way to resolve the issue. Now, you might be okay with that. You might say, well, the chances of that is pretty small. We'll deal with it when it comes. But there's a similar situation, which I think is possibly more likely. And that's, imagine a new group of councillors is elected on a platform of change, reforming the organisation, and they've been vocal about their intention to dismiss the CEO as their first order of business. So it's not far-fetched to imagine that a CEO in that situation might be unwilling or unable to administer the oath or affirmation. They might need to take immediate leave to deal with their own well-being. And they may not be able to appoint an acting CEO in those circumstances. So you'd be in that same situation. So there's a few options. I had a look through the Act to see, is there actually anything that could be done? Well, there's a provision that allows the minister to appoint an administrator if there's a large number of extraordinary vacancies. But these aren't extraordinary vacancies, they're ordinary ones. So I don't think that can apply. The minister can suspend a council if they're satisfied that they've failed to provide good governance, which arguably you could do here. But the question would be, can the minister suspend a councillor who's not actually a councillor? I don't know the answer to that one.
And you're saying the minister has no power to appoint a CEO, perhaps in that scenario that you've
none at all,
described.
Because of course local government is a distinct and separate level of government. So it's deliberately written that all the minister's powers have pretty clear guardrails around them, and the minister can't just unilaterally step in and start appointing staff. So another option would be to wait until the deadline for swearing in has passed, but that's a 3-month wait, and it requires a whole new election afterwards. So doing that would be no good. So maybe you'd need to turn to a legislative amendment. Well, Parliament is just about to rise for the summer break, so you'd want to get on that pretty quickly. So look, I don't know what the solution is. I think there's probably a need the next time somebody's looking at this part of the Act to look at, can there be some tweaks? They could be something as simple as the minister having a reserve power, hence the title of this segment, a reserve power to swear in the councillors in the absence of a CEO. It could be allowing someone else in the council also to administer the oath, perhaps the councillor conduct officer at each council, and then you'd have at least 2 people. So, there's a few different options, and I think they're probably worth exploring at some point.
I think they should have had you do some scenario checking on the legislation before it was adopted, Rhys.
Well, I do like to black hat them from time to time, and thankfully we've never been in this situation, and hopefully we never will. But legislation is sometimes there for fixing those wicked problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rhys, as we've discussed on the panel already, lots of results coming in. 4 councils have already had their results officially declared. So they're moving now into this period of induction, oath of office, etc. And no doubt governance people are turning their minds to it.
They are. And look, the reason I've talked a bit about oaths and affirmations this week is really to alert members that an edition of Governance Insights has gone out today, and it's explaining exactly what you need to swear in your councillors. So there's new wording with the making of the updates to the local government regulations. There's also some wording from the Oaths and Affirmations Act that needs to be included. There's record keeping requirements, and there's various different variations for councillors in different circumstances. There's obviously an oath or an affirmation. There's the ability to conduct it online, deal with people that have disabilities, make various amendments for people with other religious beliefs. There's a whole lot of different options for people. So I've put out a governance insights to members, including what's probably the most useful is the simple template, the document that they need to read from and sign. That went out today.
Excellent. People will be receiving that and saying, hallelujah, thank you, Rhys, and the VLGA. So that's terrific. That's reserve powers for this week. Rhys, what's up your sleeve for next week?
Oh, I haven't thought about it, but it might be a little bit of a wrap up on the final elections. We'll know all the numbers by then. And I, like many, am watching very, very closely at the gender balance and to see how that lands. So I'll definitely have an answer on that question next week.
Excellent. Look forward to it. Thanks, Rhys. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
You too, Chris. Bye.
Thanks again to Rhys for the segment. Still thinking about what's going to be on next week's segment, but I'm sure he'll come up with something interesting in the context of all these election results. Let's get back to some news. A couple more stories to talk about. Tony, this happened, we were talking about Casey. This has happened out at Casey where a decision, one of the final decisions of the panel of administrators there, is getting some press and causing some consternation in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So a highly contentious waste transfer station that's 250 metres from homes has been approved by the Casey administrators this month, just a matter of days before they would be replaced by the new council. This has angered locals in Hampton Park there in the city of Casey. It's a facility that has a 25-year lifespan, and it's to receive waste from 10 eastern suburbs councils. And so again, what's happened here is the administrators during the election caretaker period, if you like, have made what I would say is a very major significant decision right on the very evenings or the very last days before, or at least last weeks before the return of councillors. So what I'd say is that there's probably a lot of CEOs and senior officers out there saying, well, the administrators have done the council a favour. It was going to be a really difficult decision for the elected councillors to in the face of all this community opposition, to make a determination for this waste transfer station to proceed. It's much needed. It's a much needed facility. Services a large component of Melbourne. But what I'd say about that is, really, do we really value our local democracy so much that we'd rather, see something like this occur, just before the return of elected councillors, because what we don't think that they're able to withstand some public pressure or make a reasonable decision. And if that's what we think, why wouldn't we allow the state government to have a call-in process here and make the decision through that process? I just think it's a bit of, to me, it's the wrong way of doing things. And I do empathise with the position of those administrators and senior officers that would say, my gosh, how will the council ever make this decision in the face of all this community opposition? They might end up, not supporting the transfer station purely because of lots of opposition. It's something that ultimately is needed in Melbourne. But, to me, it's just a disrespect, and it's a cynical way of doing things, I think. Disrespect for local democracy.
Okay, that's probably one of the strongest.
And also, last thing, sorry to interrupt, but those elected councillors who oppose this, right?
Yeah.
They're walking into council with a monitor who made this decision.
Was part of making the decision.
I'm not sure what that means for relationships.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. However, can I just shift that around and just talk about the fact that, we would have to have a look at whether the statutory days of determination of this planning application would have been exceeded. It could have been that Veolia were on the brink of going straight to VCAT, which would have negated sort of the councillors having a decision on this one. So it might have been outside of the statutory 60-day period. I don't know what the position is, but it might have been that was the case anyway. It is interesting that the state haven't called in these kind of major applications, as you say, Tony. They're calling in applications for housing. Why are they not calling in these major applications that have an impact on people's lives potentially? So that is interesting, because these are majorly controversial, these applications. It just seems to be, particularly when the state sort of will get involved in EPA approvals and all that kind of stuff, but they're not interfering in things like this. So there's a couple of points there that I just wanted to make, Chris, around this one. It's an interesting one. I think I do agree with some of Tony's comments, but I am sort of saying, well, how long has it been in with the council for? It's probably going to, probably would have ended up in VCAT anyway. So,
Yeah. Okay. So pretty strong opinions there from Tony, and a little bit of balance there from Julie potentially. I notice in the Age article, which this is based on, it does refer to a statement from Casey. I've checked their website looking for that statement. I haven't been able to find that yet, but it also notes that separate works approval from the EPA is still required before Veolia can begin to build that facility. So we might hear more about that. And I'm keen to see that statement from Casey, whether there's some more detail in there that gives us some context as well. And on that also, last week we reported on an article that was published in the Geelong Advertiser. I guess this is a bit of a cautionary tale for me as well. The CEO of Greater Geelong, Ali Wasty, reached out to me after that to point out some flaws in that story, and there were some flaws, surprise, in a media story. One of the things it said was that industrial action affecting waste collection was being anticipated, but as Ali told me, that's contracted out to a contractor and is not a factor in enterprise bargaining negotiations. And she said, for the record, the council is not anticipating industrial action at this time. So there's a bit of balance.
That's really good news
on that one as well. There's two sides to every story always, and it is a bit risky sometimes just taking at face value what we see in the papers. Another bit of news this week out of Benalla. I did hint that we might see a few CEOs moving over the next few weeks. Dominic Testoni, who's been there since 2019, has resigned and is moving to, this is where the domino effects are starting to happen, he's moving to Macedon Ranges as the Director of Assets and Operations. And you may know or recall that was the position held by Shane Walden before he was appointed recently as the new CEO at Golden Plains Shire Council. So a vacancy coming up at Benalla. He'll finish there in January.
Oh, well, that's
Hearing any more, guys, about CEO movements around?
Look, I think there's going to be more, Chris. I think there's going to be more movement. But, it's good to see that we're keeping some of those really talented people within the sector, moving around, looking at different opportunities, and creating a bit of change for some of the rural councils, bring fresh ideas, which is great.
Perhaps one more story just to discuss briefly before we wrap up. I noticed this week Australia Post have put out a call to councils across the country asking for stronger action against dog attacks. And it comes as new data reveals over 49 incidents every week in the past 6 months against posties. So Australia Post wants to see stricter enforcement of animal management laws and increased monitoring in order to protect their personnel. Happy to say Victoria's down the list in terms of the highest number of dog-related incidents. It's led by Queensland, followed by New South Wales and Western Australia. I think Victoria comes in fourth. This is probably missing an important piece of the puzzle, though, don't we think, team? And that is individual owner responsibility for their animals.
Mm-hmm. But the funny story, Chris, is on the weekend when I was up in the north east of the state, there was a postie convention that was going on, and I saw a whole lot of posties on motorbikes, and they were all wearing these postie hats, I suppose, their helmets that all looked like they were doggies. So maybe the issue is they shouldn't wear those doggy helmets, it was hilarious. All these going by with these doggy type helmets on, and it was just, they were obviously having some kind of celebration. But it just reminded me of that, and I thought, that
might have
could
hit on
be the
something
reason
there.
why doggies chasing doggies.
Any thoughts on that, Tony?
No. My dogs are very well behaved. They just licked the postman. But something that caught my eye this week, Chris and Julie, the conversation we've been hearing in national politics around the Qantas Chairman's Lounge and this gratuity going to not just to politicians, but to leading names across Australia. And yesterday, the ACCC chair, the regulator, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, which regulates Qantas, amongst other places, came out and spoke about, the fact that she had membership of the Chairman's Lounge, wouldn't make a difference to the way she regulated Qantas, and it was all declared and transparent. And that's the line the politicians have been using too. Just compare that to imagine local government. Yeah. Imagine we have a mayor or a councillor saying, that major developer that I am involved in having to make decisions about regularly, I've declared that gratuity I get every year from them. Everyone knows about it, and it makes no difference to the way I make decisions about them. There's a different rule for local government than there is for federal, isn't there? And it's ironic that this is allowed to occur.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point you make, Tony, and I agree 100%. Interesting. All right. Anything else from you, Julie?
No, all good, Chris.
Okay.
Tony and I are off to have a very, very busy couple of weeks by the sounds of it.
Into induction mode. We'll talk to you again next week when we should have the complete picture from across the 78 councils in Victoria that have gone to election this year. Keep an eye on the Local Government News Roundup website for more results. I'm going back to hitting the refresh button a million times an hour for the VEC website, and we'll talk to you again very soon for more TGU, brought to you by Hunt & Hunt Lawyers as part of the VLGA Connect series. Watch us on YouTube, listen to us on podcast, and we'll be back with you soon.